This is a screencast for Lesson 40 of Stephen's C# 24-Hour Trainer. This lesson provided an introduction to WPF programming, and in this try it we're going to build an application similar to this one, only instead of using a grid as is done in the text, we're going to use a stack panel. So here's Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new WPF application. I'm going to call it Critters. So initially we get a big window right here that contains a grid control. If I look down here in the XAML editor on the bottom, you can see there's the grid control that it contains by default. If I click on a control in the designer up here, you'll see that the XAML editor selects it down below. If I look at the properties window, it'll show me information about this control. For example, here it's a grid. It has no name. You could type a name in here if you wanted to. Here are its properties. Now in this program we want to get rid of the grid and use a stack panel instead. So I'm just going to click on it, press delete so it's gone. If I look down here in the code editor, you'll see there's a window, there's its closing tag, and there's nothing in between. That grid is gone. So now let's add a stack panel. I didn't want to open that. So I select the window up here, open the toolbox, and just double click the stack panel. That will drop one in. By default, the stack panel assumes this size. I'm not sure why it bothers to do that, because normally with controls like stack panel and grid and most other controls, you want them to figure out their size based on what contains them, not based on some number. For example, here it's set height equal to 100 and width equal to 200, and it's given the name stack panel 1. We don't really need any of that. If we get rid of the width and height, that will make the control stretch to fill its parent, in this case the window. In normal Windows Forms programming, all controls must have a name. In WPF programming, they don't. And in general, you don't need to give a control a name unless you're going to manipulate it with code behind. We're not going to do anything with this stack panel and the code behind, so let's just get rid of that. It doesn't need a name. This window is pretty big. I'm going to click on the window and then make it a little smaller so that it fits on the form better, or fits on my screen here. You can go down here into the XAML editor and change this too if you want to. So for example, here the height is 161. I'll change it to 150. Alright, so let's go back up here and put a few image controls inside the stack panel. So I select the stack panel, open the toolbox, double click a couple times, and let's see what happened. There's our stack panel. Now I'm having trouble finding that image control. There it is. The reason I couldn't find it over here is because it's centered horizontally. The second image control is down below that one, which is off the window, so I can't select it conveniently. If you go down into the XAML editor, you can find those controls. There they are. And if you click on one here, it's highlighted up here in the designer. So now you can see this one is down below. There's a couple problems with this. First, we don't really want these things arranged vertically. We want them arranged horizontally. That's a feature of the stack panel. So let's go select the stack panel, go over to the properties window, and I want to change its orientation. Now in this case, that's a pretty common property, so it's selected by default here. It's also in the common category. If you didn't know where that was, you'd have to snoop around in these other categories to try to find it. That can be difficult, particularly since this other category can be quite large. It's got everything that doesn't fit into another category. If you're having trouble finding the property you want, you can sort them alphabetically. So if you know that orientation is what you need, it's easier to find. Or you can type in the search box. And as you type, the property window shows properties that match whatever it is you're typing. So I'm going to change the orientation property to horizontal and clear my search box. So now if we go back over to the designer here, get rid of the properties window, there's the first image, there's the second, there's the third. So they're arranged horizontally as we wanted. They're too big though. When they got dropped on the form, they were given this default height and width. So they're not really behaving the way we want them to. What we really want them to do is grow to be as big as they want to be, subject to the constraint that they fit inside the stack panel. Well, right now they don't contain any content, so they don't really know how big they want to be. Let's start with that. So I'm selecting that first control, go back to the properties window, and I'm going to give it an image. Okay, to do that, use the source property. Before I do that, let me find some images. I have some in this directory. These are in the files that are available for download for this lesson. I'm just going to copy them into the new critters application that I built. So if we look in that directory now, you can see these are files that were automatically generated for the program. There's the solution file. You can double click that to reopen this one, and here are the images that I just copied in. So now back over here, we go to the source property, click the ellipsis. There are no images in this project yet, so I'll click add, find this thing, okay, and pick the butterfly image. We'll say OK. Let's go to the next image control. We'll add another image. We'll pick the frog image for this one. And the platypus for this one. Let me go back over here now and make a couple more image controls. Right now these images are huge, so this third one actually doesn't even fit in the window. So it's kind of, well, I can still select this and press copy, paste, paste to get two more. It's hard for me to select them in the designer, but it's easy enough to click on them down here. So I'll select that image and set its source property to the shark, and then select the last image, set its source property to the tiger. So now we have all of our image controls. They don't fit. Part of the reason is that they have explicitly set sizes. So let me get rid of those. Let's get rid of the heights. Now you notice the frog looks kind of squished. There's the butterfly. It's squished because we've specified a width but not a height. Let me get rid of the width specifications too. And now they're going down to sizes that make sense for the control, given the fact that they need to fit inside this stack panel. They still don't all fit, however, because some of these images are wider than others. The frog is almost square, while the platypus and the shark are relatively short and wide. So one way I can fix that is give them all the same width. I could do that just by typing in here. Let me get rid of these names too. We don't need them for this application, and they're just cluttering up the code. So if I give them all the same width, I can do that right here, just typing width equals 100. Okay, and now, so now those two, the butterfly and the frog, have width equals 100. But now you notice the butterfly looks squished. I've given it a width, but I haven't given it a height. I don't really want to give it a height, because if I do, then I have to give it the correct height to make it not look squished. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this stretch property to uniform. So when stretches fill, like it is by default, what it does is it stretches its image so that it fills the image control, even if that means distorting it. If I change stretch to uniform, that means make the picture as big as possible while still fitting inside the control, but don't distort it. So that's really the setting we want. Now you can type these values in here in the code window, or you can do that in the property, or up here in the designer. Let me just click on those three, go over to the properties window. I'm going to change their stretch to to uniform, and I'm going to change their widths to 100. So now they all fit. Let me do the tiger. Width instead of auto, we'll make it 100, and for stretch instead of fill, we'll make it uniform. So we've got something that almost works here. It looks pretty good. The one big drawback to it is that there's a lot of duplicated code down here. Width equals 100, width equals 100, stretch equals uniform, stretch equals uniform. Okay, and we got rid of some other duplicated code, but those at least are repeated here 5 times. And that's not a good programming practice. So what we can do is we can define a style and move those common properties into the style. If you're going to use the XAML editor a lot, you probably want to make it big, and one way to do that is to resize these two panels like that. Another way to do it, which some developers use, is they keep this top part big and the bottom part little, and if you click on this swap panes button, it moves the code to the top and the the designer to the bottom, or vice versa. So let's create a resources section. In the text, I did that in the window. So I gave this window object here, it's a resources section. But almost anything in here can have a resources section. In this case, I'm going to give it to the stack panel. So the way I do that is I do stack panel.resources. So now these resources belong to the stack panel, and they are only visible inside the stack panel. These image controls are inside the stack panel, so they will be able to see it. If there were other controls not inside the stack panel, they would not be able to see it. Although in this case, the stack panel is the Windows single child, so everything is inside of it. All right, so in here we create our style. We do that by making a style element. We give it a target type. In this case, it's going to be image because we want it to affect image controls. And I'm going to give it a key. That's what we use to later reference this thing. I'm going to call it image style. Inside the style, we use setter objects to set properties. So I'm going to create a setter. I'm going to say property equals width, value equals 100. This is a shorthand syntax. This slash close bracket is a shorthand syntax for closing the setter element without a separate closing tag. You can do that if you don't need this thing to contain anything. For example, here, this image control starts with an image tag and it ends with slash bracket. In contrast, the stack panel needs to contain things. It needs to contain resources and these image controls. So it starts with an open tag and then it ends with a corresponding closing tag with the same name but the slash in front of it. All right, so back to our style. There's one setter. I'm going to copy and paste that one so I can just modify the property value to stretch. S-T-R-E-T-C-H. And if I try to leave it like this, it should get confused. Yeah, it's getting confused about something else. But it shouldn't like a stretch value of 100. What it really wants here is something like uniform. All right, let me try to run it again. I think there may be an event handler that's missing that it wants. Yeah, and actually this is a problem with the editor. It says, does not contain a definition for window underscore loaded. So if I look around, I can see up here, if I go to the error page, it doesn't really show me where the error is very well, or it won't jump me there. But right there is it's defining an event handler called window underscore loaded for the window. And I haven't provided code behind for that. Let me just get rid of that and run the program again. Let's see what happens. Okay, so the program runs. That's good. But we're not using that style. Okay, all these images still have hard-coded widths and stretch values. So let's get rid of those. And replace them with the style. You notice that when I got rid of them, they all went back to their former behaviors so that they're too big to fit on the form. So now what I want to do is in this thing I want to refer to that style. So I'm going to say style equals, and then we use this somewhat odd syntax, static resource. That's saying this is a resource defined somewhere in a resources section, and static means it doesn't change while the program is running. These values stay the same. And then here I want to give it the name of the resource. I called it image style. So now if I run the program, that image style should apply to the butterfly, and you can see it's smaller than the others, and it doesn't apply to the others yet. So let's go back in here into the code, and I'm going to just grab this and copy and paste it into the others. Now they're all using the same style. Let's run the program again, and they all have the nice sizes that we gave them before. Now they are not resizing themselves because the style specifies they should have width 100 and their scale is uniform, so they stretch vertically however much is appropriate for a width of 100. and since their width doesn't change as we resize the window, they don't change either. And that's pretty much it for this example. You can see some of the techniques you need to use. You can work in the design window. You can also work in the XAML editor. If you select a control in the design window, it's also selected in the editor and vice versa. And then you can use the properties window to modify its properties, more or less the way you do in a Windows Forms application.